Well, in an effort to boost her stalled campaign, Vice President Kamala Harris appeared at a CNN town hall style event last night, where included in her usual torrent of word salad answers came a comment that further clarified her commitment to abortion on demand. When pressed by CNN's Anderson Cooper on how she would achieve her pro-abortion agenda, Harris called again for ending the filibuster, the long-standing Senate procedure that protects the minority party and the country from majority tyranny and encourages productive debate and consensus. Eliminating this safeguard would do more than allow the left to pursue its abortion agenda. It would go much, much further. Where would it take us? Well, joining me now to discuss this is Senator Kevin Cramer from North Dakota. He serves on 4 Senate committees, including the Senate Armed Services Committee. Senator Cramer, welcome back to Washington Watch. Thanks for joining us.
It's my pleasure. It's good to be with another man of the House as we talk about the Senate.
Well, let's talk, Senator, about the impact eliminating the filibuster would have, not just on the Senate. I mean, this is not some kind of archaic rule that, people just want to hang on to. This was by design for specific purposes. Tell us about it.
That's right. And really the purpose is by the way, consistent with the purpose of the Senate from the founders in the first place. In fact, coming from a small state like North Dakota, I'm often grateful to Benjamin Franklin for calling for prayer at the time of the Constitutional Convention when they were arguing to the point of almost a complete meltdown over whether we'd have a unicameral Congress based on state power or based on population power, and they settled for both. And so they created the Senate to be the firewall against the passions of the zealots, a firewall to prevent the impulses of the much more rambunctious House of Representatives that I was honored to serve in for 6 years. But Tony, there should be no mistake. It's not just the filibuster. They'd like to get rid of the Senate basically in general. They resent that a guy from the center of the North American continent with 780,000 people would have the equal power to, say, Chuck Schumer or to some other senator, say, in California. And remember, too, that here's what I can't get over. The thing she's the most passionate about, Tony, if you just think about that, it's so disgusting. It shows you why we need a filibuster, why we need a firewall.
Right. It is fascinating, disturbing, all at the same time, that this has become her number one policy objective is abortion on demand until birth, and she's willing to do away with anything that gets in the way. But elimination of the filibuster will lead to court packing. That's something else that the left wants. They want to dilute the court because of the conservative current court. So they would want to put 13 members on the court. They would want to add D.C. As a state, right. and Puerto Rico. And so then we have 4 additional senators almost ensuring a perpetual left-leaning Senate.
Well, and therein lies the current problem, but there would be lots of other ones. Because if they just had 2 years, say, without a filibuster and a majority in both chambers, even a very narrow majority, they could literally make permanent majorities for the Democrats in both the House and the Senate and the courts. And then, even if we got the filibuster back, or if the American public came to their senses, you still couldn't overcome the damage that was done in that one moment, that one crisis moment where the issue was so critical, like federal law codifying abortion on demand right up until birth. These are not insignificant issues, and rarely, and by the way, you'll often hear them say, well, we just need it for this one thing.
Right.
For Nancy Pelosi, it was federalizing elections.
Right.
Thank goodness, that we had 2 Democratic senators, Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, who would not blow up the filibuster. And by the way, one of those senators actually supported the legislation, but also supported the integrity of the filibuster and the firewall of the Senate.
Senator Cramer, you've been very, very supportive of Israel. You've been outspoken on it. You've actually you're preparing to introduce legislation to stand with Israel. I want to play a clip from last night, town hall meeting, where Anderson Cooper asked about the issue of Israel. Play clip number 10.
He has said that he's casting himself as a protector of Israel. Do you believe you would be more pro-Israel than Donald Trump?
I believe that Donald Trump is dangerous.
That was her response to every question. She did not answer any policy questions. She only attacked Donald Trump. You've been in the Senate. You were there when Donald Trump was there. You were there when the Abraham Accords were negotiated and came into place, when there was peace in the Middle East. What do you see today? And in your opinion, who has a better handle on the Middle East?
Well, you've just described two visions, one of Donald Trump's and one of the Biden-Harris administration, and two actual records. And clearly the world was much better off under Donald Trump. And I think it's basic. I think it comes down to projection of strength. Donald Trump was able to negotiate the Abraham Accords because he came from a position of strength. Israel knew that we always had their backs, and Israel's enemies knew that we always had Israel's backs. And now they're wanting to appease the Arab states. They want to appease our enemies. They want to appease our friends. They want to appease our frenemies. And the problem with that is that every dictator, every despot in the world looks at the United States and says, we can run all over these people. And so, and by the way, and their allies. And that kind of weak talk is ripe for danger, not just in the Middle East, but throughout the world. And we're seeing it play out. But when it comes to Israel, Tony, it's not difficult. It's biblical, as you know. My Lutheran mother would come out of her grave and primary me if I ever did anything but stand with Israel. Just so you know, it's that foundational to me and really to our country, and should be.
You're absolutely right. I agree 100%. And as we distance ourselves from Israel or become a stumbling block to Israel, we put ourselves, I think, in a very precarious situation. And I'm speaking both politically, geopolitically, also from a security standpoint, but spiritual as well.
That's right.
You have you're going to introduce legislation, the Stand with Israel Act.
Right.
Once the House and the Senate reconvene in a few weeks. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so what we're seeing now is movements within the United Nations, as you know, and of course the Palestinian state, being part of that, or the possibility of all of this. And one of the first things that the enemies of Israel want to do is diminish Israel's impact or role on the United Nations. Either get rid of them altogether out of the United Nations, or somehow restrict their role at the United Nations. And my view of it is simply this: if the United Nations does anything to prevent Israel's involvement or to restrict their involvement in any way, shape, or form, it should be the last dollar they get from the American taxpayers. And so, what does the United States have to offer? We have to offer our resources, and we shouldn't be offering our resources to an organization that is so belligerent and so anti-Israel and so anti-Semitic as the United Nations, should they pull a stunt like this. So it's a pretty harsh piece of legislation. It's pretty clear. It's pretty strong. If you don't stand with Israel, the United States can't stand with you.
Well, when you introduce it, we'll have you back on to talk more about it. We've got about a minute and a half left. I want to get your response to the leak in the Pentagon of the U.S. intelligence that was tracking Israeli preparation for a retaliatory strike against Iran. That apparently has now been put on hold based upon the leak of that information. It appears Israel has to go back to the drawing board.
Yeah. Well, they better find out where the leak came from. They still say they don't know whether it was a hack or whether into the system, or whether it was somebody within the United States, within the Department of Defense, that leaked this information. They should, first of all, get to the bottom of that leak, while at the same time making sure that we assist Israel in whether it's new plans or new tactics, new strategies, whatever the case might be. But I'm afraid that there are some bad actors, and we need to ferret that out.
I would agree. Again, this puts us in a very precarious situation. If we're leaking sensitive information, top secret this information was, on Israel, our ally in the Middle East. Senator Cramer, always great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Always my pleasure. Thank you, Tony.